name is Dr. Chenoa Tremblay, and I'm a researcher with the SETI Institute. And I like to study life in the universe in new and interesting ways.
Wow, how interesting. Why haven't we found any aliens yet?
There's actually a lot of different answers to that question, or a lot of possible answers for that question. So if we think of the technology, maybe we're constantly learning every single day about new ways of exploring the universe. And to do that, we're constantly improving on the technology that we have now and that we might have in the future. And so we can take inspiration from different industries to try to learn about that. And another thing is that maybe the way we're thinking about how another race might try to communicate isn't quite right. So we're trying to think of new ways of how somebody else might think. If you think of trying to think of how a classmate might relate to a question that you might ask. Maybe they give an answer that you don't expect, and that can be the way that life is. Another answer I think is kind of fun to explore is, what if we're the oldest thing in the galaxy? What if we're the only ones so far that have been able to develop a technology to communicate, and everybody's too young, and so we have to look for life in a different way, right? Maybe we look for planets that might have the potential for life, although it might be baby life to begin with. So those are some ways that we might answer the question of why we haven't found it yet.
Do you think there are any aliens? And if so, what kind?
I think there's a huge possibility that there's some other life form out there. But I think what they look like, how they might communicate, how they might function in their day-to-day is highly dependent on the atmosphere that they're in, the Earth, the environment around them. If we think of the life here on Earth, it's very diverse, right? And if we take a thought experiment where we go, well, if we changed a little bit about the world we live in, how we might have changed to develop, right? Might we look closer to dinosaurs at some point? Or would we still have the birds that we have on our planet? So I think that it's hard to predict exactly what life would look like, but I think it's really fun to explore some ideas if you think of how different environments that we understand of other planets in our solar system or other moons, and how life might develop. And that gives us some clues as to how we might find it too.
If we find them, should we try and meet them?
Whenever somebody asks me this question, I think of it as if you have a new neighbor that shows up next door. The first thing you do is don't go throw open their door and get in their face and say, hey, how's it going, right?
Yeah.
That would be kind of rude.
Yeah.
And I think we should treat alien life the same way. If we notice that there's something there, we should try to find some way to assimilate, knocking on their door. Maybe they say, go away, don't bother us, leave us alone, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe they say, oh, hi. They try to communicate through the door for a little bit before they're willing to open it.
Yeah.
And so I think we should have that respectful approach as well.
What's the biggest mystery you'd like to solve?
So my background is in chemistry. So chemistry is the study of molecules and atoms, which are the building blocks for life, right? And right now we have a number of mysteries around the chemistry of space. And I'd like to try to solve one of those. So one is that the molecules in our body, we call them organic molecules because they contain a carbon atom. Now we can find a lot of organic molecules in space as well. Not very complicated ones, but we can find some. But we can't find inorganic molecules, which are ones that were primarily made up of something other than carbon. And I'd like to find out why. I'd like to figure out if the reason that is because it doesn't exist, and that tells us a lot about the potential for life to exist, or is it because we haven't looked in the right place? And so one of the things I like to try to do is explore new wavelengths of light and try to see if we can learn the answer to that mystery.
Wow, that's cool.
Thanks.
Do you think we can find aliens?
I think we can. I think it's just going to take time. There's just so much, there's so many different ways that we could look for life. But one of the biggest challenges before we look for life, we have to define what is life. And that's something we don't have a very good answer for.
Yeah.
If you think really hard about it, it feels really simple at first. Things like it's a question, what is life? Oh, we look around and we see, well, that's life, that's life. We can see examples of life, but add a definition to it.
Yeah.
That's very hard. So, and then if we can define life, well, what do we expect to see if we do find it?
That's good.
And how do we define the life? And so those are very challenging questions. And so I think we will find it, but I think it's going to take a lot more work and a lot more help first.
Okay. One more question.
Sure.
Do you think their technology might be more advanced than ours or ours than theirs?
I think we try to take that into account. It's very possible. Absolutely. We think of the search for life in two different categories. The search of what we call technosignatures. And this is the signs of communicating through technology. Or biosignatures, the signs of life through those molecules that I talked about. And whether there's the right chemistry involved to assume that life could exist.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So we can use those. And we consider those two categories to be inclusive to both of those ideas. So but it's also not exclusive. So if we find somewhere, do you know what a tardigrade is?
No. Can you tell me about it?
So a tardigrade is a very simple, very, very small animal. We call them water bears because we find them all over the earth.
Yeah,
right?
I've seen them.
Yeah. So if we had tardigrades, but they're bigger, and they're playing Super Nintendos, I think we could find them.
Yeah.
Or if we had an entire planet where all that ever existed were the robots they created, we probably could find them too. So those are the two different searches that we look for so we can find all of life.
That's cool. Okay. So why do you think kids should be excited for science?
Science is all about being curious. And I think all kids should be curious. I think you should go around and you should explore the world. Even if you don't have an ambition to be a scientist, be curious.
Yeah.
And therefore you somewhat are a scientist. But if you go and you see something and you're interested in it, I would encourage everybody to go and explore that thing. Whether it's doing some experiments in your kitchen, or if it's just going out with a magnifying glass into your backyard and exploring around. But I think everybody should be curious and explore the world.
Yes. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's awesome.